Hey, Nick, good to see you.
Hey, Pete. Nice to see you as well.
I am so excited to talk with you today and catch up on all things customer success and post sale revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But before we get into that, hey everyone, thank you very much for joining us for another session for the Modern Sales Pros Megasco, the League of Extraordinary Sellers and Successors.
Love it.
Extraordinary.
Thanks for
Six,
including us. I like it.
it's all revenue, baby. It's all revenue.
Mhm.
It's not a funnel, it's a bow tie. Just ask Jocko, right? I'm really excited to talk with Nick here today. I'm sure if you haven't been under a rock in the last few years, you're probably familiar with Nick, and you're probably familiar with Gainsight. But Nick is the CEO of Gainsight. Nick, you want to give folks a little bit of a overview on what Gainsight does and how you guys position yourself nowadays?
Absolutely. Thanks, Pete. Really appreciate it. So yeah, Gainsight, we're going to talk in this conference. You're talking about sales in general, but as you alluded to, so much of revenue in subscription businesses comes from your existing customers,
Oh
both
yeah,
keeping them, expanding them, and also becoming advocates to drive new deals. And
sure.
historically, the post-sales area was underemphasized. And so we started out building software for CSMs to be more proactive with their customers, more scalable, get to the right customer at the right time, have the right insights. But then we figured out the post-sales world in general needs reinvention. So we got into the world of like driving product adoption in app. We have a product called
Mhm.
PX. We got into the world of creating customer community so people are connected to each other, learn from each other, and then customer education so you can train your customer to get more value. And then over time, more and more of that post-sale world, we want to be basically the operating system for the post-sale journey.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm really excited to talk about that as relates to incremental products, the
Yep.
importance of post say like incremental products from a go-to-market standpoint, because obviously our audience here today, very focused on revenue, TAM expansion, ASP expansion, et cetera, et cetera. But also just talk about customer success and post-revenue best practices
Yeah.
as well. It seems to be post-sale revenue best practices as well, because all those things are super important and top of mind for folks. For folks who don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I am one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes sales performance management software that helps sales organizations measure, manage, and improve performance through more effective frontline management. And I also happen to be one of the founders of Modern Sales Pros as well. So happy to have everyone here today. Nick, let's talk about that. The first thing first there. Gainsight has really, you kind of like tease this a little bit, but you know, Gainsight has established the customer success category. I mean, I think you probably had a hand in that. I mean, how many LinkedIn sessions have you
Definitely
done? Probably
a
like
couple LinkedIn posts.
thousands.
Yeah, a couple LinkedIn
Yeah,
posts.
yeah, we're here, there, right? Whatever. But obviously the post sale category or like jobs to be done is much larger than just that, which you kind of alluded to. Maybe you can kind of talk about a little bit about like how you guys observed that, encountered
Yeah.
that, and then what you heard from your customers that made you react accordingly. Maybe talk about how some of those reactions have been over the last like 12 to 24 months.
No, thank you, Pete. And obviously, I'm so excited to be here because I do think CS and sales are kind of coming together. So for the
Oh yeah.
MSP audience, this is super cool to have an opportunity to have that dialogue. And then I will put in a shameless plug. Our team uses Atrium. They really like it. I'm not just saying that. So good job by your team, Pete, getting software in
Yeah,
the Atrium.
we love we love Gainsight sales leaders. They're absolutely delightful, whether they're at Gainsight or they're alumni as well.
Oh,
There's
there
a
you go.
very
Good.
a
So
very strong alumni population
advocacy
as well.
selling, advocacy selling. See, that's good. I like what you did there. And so
Thanks,
what
coach.
happened? Oh, yeah, exactly. What happened for us, it really started pretty early. I'd say like 2016 or maybe even 2015, where what happened in the early days of SaaS was people are like, okay, I've got this new business model. It's about lifetime value retention. I'm going to
Yep.
add this role to like do everything after the sale and solve the problems and reduce churn and whatever, right? So everyone created this customer success manager. And obviously that's awesome. I mean, 200,000 people plus in that job in the world, and a lot of companies doing really well with it. But I think one of the things people figured out is CS is more, we say CS is greater than CSM. And what I mean by that is if the goal of CS is lifetime value, net revenue retention, it's much
Yep.
more than just a CSM. And it's more in two ways. One way is like there's more parts of the journey, right? So the CSM is just part of it. The other way is you can't just throw people at it to be cost effective and, efficient growth and all that. And so because of that, years and years ago, we're like, well, we need to expand, right? Obviously for us too, it's like create a broader TAM, like more to sell, right? So there's a business interest, but we saw the market.
There's more jobs to be done.
More jobs to be done. And, companies were having CCOs, chief customer officers, or CROs. And either way, we were asking them, what are the things that you want to solve the bigger problem beyond a CSM, right? And some of the things we heard were better product adoption data. That's why I got into this area called Gainsight PX. Better customer community and more leverage by customers helping each other versus us having to do everything one-on-one. Better training and enablement. We saw that ourselves, like training is both internal training, but in our case, training the customer, so critical to customer success. We all know, like, think of Salesforce as an example. There's probably 1 million plus Salesforce admins out there certified, and they drive like the growth of Salesforce, right? And same thing, Gainsight, not 1 million yet, but tens of thousands of certified Gainsight people out there. And so we saw these 3 areas: product adoption, community, education. And then we saw there's so much more. You look at the whole journey, there's onboarding, there's support, there's professional services, advocacy. So a lot more to go for Gainsight. Some of it might be organic, some might be acquisition, some could be partnership. Like we're not necessarily going to do all of it. But the journey, which is probably more interesting for us, is what did that look like to go from a single product to multi-product? And by the way, I would say
a lot of people thinking about that.
Oh my God. And we're all of us, if you have the like pain of feeling like you never get it right and back and forth, that's us too, right? We are not some expert, a lot of trial and error. But I think that for us, if you think about the ingredients of this, right? So you start with the market insight, right? Customers need X, Y, and Z. You got to start with that. And you got to, like, there's a lot of good, tools to think about there. Like, what's the customer need, but also people call it right to win. What's your right to win in that area, right? Like, let me pick a very crazy example. We could go and build, I don't know, like software to monitor data centers, right? And we probably could figure out something, but we have no right to win. Nobody knows Gainsight in that capacity. There's no connection between our core product and that. So for us, we had to figure out, first of all, what's the customer need and what's the right to win? So in our case, it's like, okay, we're already selling to the chief customer officer. They have more needs. There's a synergy between community and customer success. There's some use cases. Sure. So we start with the strategy and the right to win. Then I think there's a few pillars for us. One pillar is then the product strategy. And I think this is something that a lot of companies, pay lip service to, and they don't really do. And this is like, you buy companies, you build them, they're totally separate. You're like, hey, there's a platform, you put a slide up that looks like all, together, and then you click in and it's not really integrated. And I think it's just harder for sellers to sell, harder for customers to get value. There's not like a better together story. So the first part is a platform roadmap that talks about this stuff coming together. And the trade-off is you have individual feature requests, right? So like in our case, the customer education product, there's all kinds of things we need to do. And then there's this like better together roadmap, and balancing those two and meeting the market where it's at. So in our case, people don't buy all these things together yet. So they want integration, but they also want each of them to be best of breed. So there's a product lens, there's a marketing lens. Do you broaden your message? Customer success like kind of leads us into this, oh, you're a software for CSMs, which by the way, most people probably think that's what we are. And so how do you define something broader? And we're working on that now. And then the third leg of the stool is the sales and kind of CS internal model for how you deliver. Do you have specialists? Do you not? Is it all integrated together? Do you train the core team? How do you get to them to be able to sell all this stuff and have that in their head? So all these, I think these are the ingredients.
Super easy.
Getting the recipe right is like hard. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of organization. I mean, like us in the sales tech world, we see this quite a bit where,
so much.
Like people identify jobs to be done. Right. And then I really like the right to win thing, where it's just like, hey, what's the use case that's like tangential to this use case, right? Maybe who's the buyer?
Who's the buyer?
Right? Who's the person who has to like feed and water it? Right. Yep. And obviously in our industry, that's like the RevOps person or team who's responsible for like, the coordination, the feeding and the watering and what have you of these things. And you see this quite a bit in the sales engagement landscape, where people are adding each other's features and so on and so forth. And I think that like, so, we all have to, observe that as like, consumers of technology, because like, we want to like lever up our teams and make them more successful with sales engagement and call recording and deal inspection and blah 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 blah, right? But at the same time, we have like existing investments, et cetera. So like there's that piece of it, and that's how it's like obviously very relevant to us. And then there's the second piece of it as well, which is there's a lot of a lot of people in the modern sales community whose companies are adding secondary products. And so like as you were noting, like being able to have like expanding the disco call to add a bunch of other questions. But wait a minute, Nick, we only booked 20 minutes for this thing. Like, how are we right? Like, am I just gonna like grab their eyeballs and like drag them through this? And so I think these are all like very challenging things. I think one question I would have for you is, you've been at this for a second at Gainsight, and I think that the leadership like requirements have probably changed as the market has changed and as the kind of company has reacted. Obviously you're one of the loudest kind of like advocates and cheerleaders of the space, but you have other things that you have to spend your time doing as well that is in reaction to and in service to these kind of things. So maybe what you could do is share a little bit of like your leadership lessons as relates to being a leader of Gainsight, being a leader of an industry, obviously being the person who's responsible ultimately for the revenue of the organization as well, and how that's changed over the last like 12 months or 24 months.
So much, and as you know, it evolves so much. By the way, you said I was one of the loudest voices, and I think a lot of people would agree I'm very loud. So that's a accurate description. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Vocal, like you and Taylor. Vocal.
Exactly. Vocal. I'm not a wallflower. And so what I mean, there's so many leadership lessons, and I like the fact that you said in the last 12 months, because I think every year they're different, right? So I think one meta one is like every year, whether you're a CEO, you're a sales leader, you're a sales ops person, every year your job is different because your company is changing, right? Multi-product, single product, whatever it is, more competition, tough economy, vendor consolidation, right? Et cetera, all these things, pricing model. And so I'm a big believer that you can figuratively or literally rewrite your job description and almost like try to get hired for that job in your head. Like, okay, the new CEO is like, Gainsight needs to be X, Y, and Z. And I thought a lot about
these things.
Like as an example, as you're bigger, like the decisions make a bigger and bigger difference because you can't pivot so quickly. You're like a aircraft carrier, not a little speedboat, right? And so therefore you got to get it right. When I tell people like leadership's pretty simple. You have to be really confident and you got to be right. And the second part cannot be underemphasized. Like the decisions are huge as you get bigger, even when you're smaller. Jeff Bezos talks about these like type 1, type 2 decisions, like the reversible type 1, which are easier to like do. But then
one way,
exactly. And then the second one is this irreversible. And I agree with that. And even the reversible ones have a big impact, right? Actually, I just got off call with our sales leadership this morning, and they're like, we changed too much. We're rolling stuff out without doing proper change management. We're not like involving managers in the process. These are legitimate feedback, right? And so I think one thing is kind of rewriting the job. A second one is really like remembering, just because in your head you've kind of changed it, you got to bring the organization along. What does that mean? Well, it means cascading. Start with the leaders, explain to them the why, go to the individual contributors, do an AMA, make it really consistent month to month. And it's like the little things that are things that are common sense but not commonly applied, right? This is a common thing we all deal with, which is, obviously, Nick, but do you do it, right? Are we actually doing it? Look at your calendar, right? So I think that's a second lesson, is the need as you get bigger for change management, right? Mm-hmm. A third one that I've thought about a lot is, some people have written about this too, just how important positioning is, and product marketing more broadly, but positioning, think about your space, right? It's like sales tech. Okay, gosh, like as an outsider, they're so competitive, right? Like everyone's getting in everyone's face. And so what do you do? Sales performance management. How does that compare to other SPM? You don't do all the other things that other SPM, but you do a thing really well, right? And so this positioning is hard, but so important to get right. And then if I
Yeah.
added in one, oh, sorry, click into that. I have one more, but click into that.
Well, I was just going to say that I think one of the things that I like to say is that, humans are really programmed by words.
Yes.
And
Good. I like that.
and so product marketing is a good example of that, where essentially what you're doing is you're using in go-to-market, we use words and images to
Yes.
direct people's thinking in a certain way. Like we bring them along through discovery questions, where it's verbally articulated, like provocative questions that get them thinking about like their current state or what have you. We use images that evoke an emotional
Yes.
response
Yeah.
to a pain point or what have you. Cool. And then importantly, we need to make sure that our words are different than other people's words.
Mhm.
Otherwise, like we'll be bucketed in together. Like Atrium's a great example. This is like historically people would perceived us as being more kind of focused on like sales analytics, but
Yeah.
ultimately we're focused on management, right?
Yes. Right.
Improving the performance of reps. And how do you do that? You do it with managers. You do it now. Metrics are a component of that, but so is interpretation, then so is the managerial actions of like coaching behavior, encouragement behavior, accountability behavior. Nick, I'm noticing that your untouched ops situation really is
Yeah.
could use some improvement here. Let's go. And I think that like so and so and then that has to evolve over time. So thinking about that and then using those same words to bring the brains along of the people within your organization. And so it's like go to market, but go to market internally, where the message has to be succinct, the message has to be clear, and it has to just be repeated again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And then and if you think you've repeated it until you're blue in the face, that's probably the point at which your reps are starting to get it, and really starting to stick. And so as a leader, that's kind of like your job, is to make it clear, right, to make it inspiring, and then just make sure that you repeat it until like you're blue in the face. What were you going to say? What was the third thing you were
No,
going
I
to note
think
there,
it's
Nick?
so well. First, I love that what you said, and I have a fourth one to add in. But what resonates me about what you guys are doing, I think it's a good lesson for everyone, is you found this unserved role. So I feel exactly what you said is true. There's the software for sales reps or SDRs. Think of a sales engagement, automated communication type thing, right? And then there's the software maybe for CROs or sales ops or whatever, let's say forecasting. And then you've got this middle ground of how do I run my team? And you found this like persona, and I can just speak from experience, where the sales leaders at Gainsight, they use some of the other tools, but what they really use is Atrium. And then our CRO will use some forecasting tools. And then our reps will use some tools begrudgingly. Reps don't like using tools, but begrudgingly they will use them. That's a shocker, I'm sure, for the people watching. The last thing I would just say is the last lesson I've had every year, but it's sort of like every year it kind of reshapes, is, when you think about your team, and this isn't just as a CEO, I think all the way up and down, if you're a leader, is every time I've felt like, oh my God, my team's like great and I don't have any gaps, I'm like, I am missing something. Like there's something you're missing. And to me, it's basically remembering for like at Gainsight, all of my direct reports have been at Gainsight forever and grew up. I mean, literally 6 years, 7 years, 9 years, 10 years. Like that's the level. And that's awesome. And it means we have no outside thinking right now. And most people have never been in a company bigger.
Which like should make the hair on the back of your neck stick up a little bit there.
Oh, totally.
Right?
But it didn't for a while because I'm like, oh, this is so great and
I feel
comfortable.
you.
But then we get super comfortable. So just remember that when you're comfortable as a leader with your team is probably when you need to start thinking about what your next role is or the next change or whatever. It's brutal, but it's just the reality. You got to constantly be evolving.
Yeah, it's like the Andy Grove, right? Like, only the paranoid survived. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think that's a great insight, Nick, which is like, hey man, like if it feels too comfortable, like there's something amiss, right?
100%.
And I think that Jason Lemkin does a really good job talking about this, where he talks about like a 50-50 ratio of of outside leaders and inside leaders as well. And I think I'm misremembering the ratio on line managers. I think it's more like you really want to, like at the line manager level, it's more about cohesion, right?
So
So
that's
it's
more
like
80-20.
oftentimes Yeah, it's like more internal promo, things like that. But then, like bringing in outside blood from places as
That makes sense.
well.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, because I think a lot of folks, the last like 24 months haven't been super fun for a lot of people in our industry, and hopefully folks have been doing an okay job at that, maintaining. I think it's been an important thing, because I think it's refocused people, right? I mean, like that's what market economics do, right? Is it focuses you on the right thing, for good or for bad, the thing that the market cares about, and and like I know that we've reacted very heavily, like we've really shifted our ICP. We pretty much are targeting organizations that have greater than 50 sellers, and I think there was a really kind of crisp change in understanding for us, where it's like, hey, the organizations that really like Jim McMahon talks about this in Qualified Sales Leader, like the pain above the noise. The pain above the noise, where a top 3 topic is like manager enablement and like better management, and things like that. That doesn't show up when you have 3 managers, right? It doesn't show up when you have 8 managers. It shows up when you have like 10, or when you have like 20, right? And so like that's like 50 reps, 100 reps, 150 reps. Anyway, so like I'm sure everyone has had their personal journey with respect to that, but obviously like customer success as a lever for growth has been important all along here. And like I think everyone's like had churns that they've been unhappy about, but maybe they've had churns that they actually were happy about, where it's kind of like, this isn't a Taylor Swift quote, this is an Ariana Grande quote, but it's like, thank you, next. Right?
Exactly.
Where it's like, hey, thank you, we appreciate the revenue, but like it turns out that like this is our ICP, etc. But I think it's important for folks, like maybe they've cleaned out their customer books of business, and they now have the people who are like the folks that they can deliver really, really, really muscular value to. And so then customer success is like is a source of growth for them. What are some of the things that you would recommend folks pay attention to as relates to customer using success, and I guess adoption, and I guess education, and what have you, as a source of growth, now that people have kind of like gotten their game tight?
Yeah, I love it. And by the way, just to put the backdrop, because everything you said resonates, and I think the last couple of years have been less fun than 2021. And I have a lot of empathy, because that means sellers and other people on incentive comp have not made their numbers or made as much money, or performance challenges, all that stuff. Very empathetic. And also I think it kind of de-energized people, right? Just naturally, it's human energy, right? Like the energy was super high in 21, but also in 21, the downside was it was frenetic, right? It's just too much, and it's just crazy, and almost we all knew it was unsustainable. And so what I think we can get into this next year, this 2024, is a mix of energetic and focused, right? You said focus, but also energetic, sustainable. I think we can find that balance. So what does that look like in CS, and how does that drive revenue? So for me, the key thing is to really unpack the sources of revenue. And I'm going to talk more about growth than preservation here, just giving the audience. So what are the different ways a customer grows? And it's kind of obvious, right? But how does the customer grow? Well, one way they grow is price increases. Another way they grow is entitlement expansion, like seats or whatever, right? Another way they grow is like modules sold to the same buyer. Another way they grow is things sold to different buyers. So you can kind of unpack for each company, you get like a waterfall, right? And so to me, it's not a one size fits all. Each of these has a different way to drive that, and how CS can help. Let's go through each of these. So price increases. Well, how does that work? Well, procurement comes in and they're like, we're going to decrease prices. And if you're watching and you're like, have you heard this one before? We're asking all vendors to cut 20% from prices, right? And everyone's saying that. And actually, I've had a couple
Never heard that.
Never heard that. I've had a couple of vendors. It's pretty funny. They're a customer of ours. They come to procurement, says, hey, we want to cut 20%. Now, in some cases, we're a customer of theirs too. Like, let's say we use their security product or something. And we're like, so are we going to get 20% off too when we renew our software? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, that's not fair. And so how do you defend your pricing and then ideally uptick it, right? Salesforce is, my understanding, getting 8% roughly a year. How do you uptick that? That's kind of very efficient growth. And it's just the reality. And software. Part of it's you got to be sticky. Like that's probably a different challenge. And, but I think CS can help. How do you get the customer really using all the stuff so that they won't leave. You know, you think about call recording is a good example. There's a lot of great technology out there. We use some of it. It's awesome. And if you're just using call recording, it's probably pretty easy to switch. If you're using call recording plus some of the advanced features. So CSM can help drive advanced feature usage, which creates stickiness, which allows price uplifts. They can also present what we at Gainsight call verified outcomes, which is basically something that your champion will attest to in terms of ROI. So for example, we just renewed a big SaaS company, public company, and the champion, and our team built this deck of like 10 slides of all the different ROI examples that they've gotten from Gainsight. Because there was a new CIO and procurement person, and they're like, hey, they knew they wanted to keep Gainsight, but can we cut costs or whatever, right? So the first thing is, you know, verified outcomes and stickiness to drive price increases or at least preservation. Second one is entitlement growth. Right now, of course, a lot of that is tied to the customer's growth. It is. It's like, okay, people weren't hiring in 2021, 2 or 23, so you're not growing seats like Gainsight or otherwise. But I think that there's stuff you can do, like for example, making sure the seats that are bought are adopted, so that when they start growing again, you're ready to go.
Not software on the shelf.
Not software on the shelf. Get it all adopted, which is hard sometimes. But then also what that means is understanding like the use cases for those different subsets. So a Gainsight example, people buy Gainsight for CSM, but also for sales, because the salespeople want to know what CS is doing. Well, let's get those sales seats adopted. Well, how do you do that? You need some best practices. Okay, how do you use Gainsight in sales? You know, how do you actually, what are the ways to use it? So second one is basically more entitlements. The third one is, and I'll pause after the third one, is cross-sell of more modules. And that's where I think we have to be real, that often those are different decision makers, right? So talking to your stakeholder is not just going to get you a deal done, but the stakeholder can give you a lot of intel. And so that's like, hey, like in our case, talking to the CS leader, hey, you know, do you guys have a community project? I saw your website as a community. Are you guys looking at that? Oh yeah, we're actually have an RFP for a community. Sweet. Can you get us an intro? Sometimes we're not even included. Can we get us an intro? And we call that a customer success qualified lead. So a lead, the CS person is teeing up for sales.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the and so moreover, I think one of the things that that CX can pay attention to feeds back into product as well, to then make that a lot easier. So as an example, you know, asking your CSMs to like somehow like drive usage, if you will, like CSMs are, you know, what are the actions that they're going to take? They like what are their football moves, if you will, like send an email, have meetings. Exactly. Right? Like that's what we do. Like, it's fine. Like, it's cool. Like that's what we do. That's what sellers do as well, right? And then what they do is they change behavior. But the problem is like those are pretty laborious. Right. So can we do things that are like potentially more scalable? So the CSM can look at that and be like, hey man, like this account looks like it's pretty sick right here, and for these reasons right here, these customers are non-adopted, or like these users are non-adopted. Okay, cool. Like I'm gonna run some automated email plays against them or whatever, but it's just like not like I can't have individual meetings with all these folks because there's only 40 hours in a week, and like I gotta be doing my quarterly business reviews and working on these big renewals and what have you. So hey, product, guess what? Like there's something going on. Like you guys should pop into the product analytics. You guys should watch a bunch of sessions to see why these people are not like using in some sort of capacity, because like, you know, these 4 users right here, they're like hitting the cover off the ball right here, but these 4 and they all went through the same onboarding together. Right. They all have the same, and they all have the same role. It's not like they're different genres of humans. Right. So like, hey, product, can you like, you know, go ahead and check this out, because, you know, papering over this with like human from a long-term standpoint is not something that's going to be economically viable. Right. Like our investors are not going to be happy about, you know, our margins if we're throwing a bunch of CX at this.
I'm so glad you said that, because that touches on 2 themes. One is customer success, and, you know, lifetime value is everyone's job, including product, right? So and product has a huge impact, as you were alluding to. What are the barriers to adoption? Why are people not using it? So that's like a huge thing. Also, this idea of a more digital first journey. And so we're a huge believer in a digital first, and like start with digital and then add humans, right? CSMs or whatever. Yeah. And how are people doing that? Well, they're doing in product communication. So this is what our PX technology does. they're doing community, they're doing automated email
Like
journeys,
little
right?
flags and flows and
All
what
these
have you.
things. They're measuring, like we have this thing, best practice of measuring customer sophistication of adoption, not just like how many licenses, but are they using your advanced features?
How deep in the product?
How deep are they? And and then how does that all tie together? Well, it saves time, but more importantly, it actually gets you to more people. Because in your example, right, Pete, like, yeah, you could do a meeting with our sales leader Jim, who I know, right? And you could do an EBR and you could send an email, but all these other people, the sales leaders at Gainsight, those are the ones you want using it, and they're not going to all do meetings with you. I mean, they like you a lot, but they're not going to do meetings. And so digital allows you to reach more of your stakeholders, more of your users. So it's not just efficiency, it's actually effectiveness as well.
Yeah, and I think another component of that too is that like you see people catching fire in a product. Like we see this, we measure usage like pretty aggressively on a per user basis, manager levels, because like the notion of sales managers using metrics to measure, manage, and improve kind of performance is, it's newish, right?
Yeah.
It's not new, right? Like, people have been like telling themselves stories that, their managers will dashboard dive for years. Now, of course, whether they actually do that is a completely other topic. But and we see this, like we'll have a customer that'll have like 20 seats or 30 managers in there or what have you, and then you see the different folks, like you see the ones who are setting it on fire, right? They're in there like 20 days 20 days a month or whatever, tons of page views, blah 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 blah. Then you see the other folks, right, who are maybe not not quite on the train. And so then what you want to do is you want to enable like the super fans to, like, you don't want them to like sit there in silence, right? Because then, like, you want to create an environment of like expectation of like, hey, cool, you got 20 seats and like 10 of the users are really crushing it, and then hey, executive, look at these 10 laggards down here. Oh, and like lionize the people who are crushing it, but then also provide them a mechanism by which to kind of like share their best practices, whatever. And I think that, like, that's kind of like community, if you will, not just within an organization, but also between,
and then between customers too. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that like the reality is, like, organizations like try to do this, like they'll try to like hack something together in Slack, which generally is awful, right? Because like you need to like join another Slack community, like you need another hole in your head.
Oh my gosh.
But to the extent that like you can facilitate inter company like interaction. I mean, we see this with modern sales pros, right? People love modern sales pros because you got a question about comp plans or whatever, and like you can get some other sales operations person somewhere else to kind of help you out with that. Well, that's not going to happen on a per product basis. And so I think that that's something that you guys want to help organizations facilitate, because it is a very scalable mechanism of successing like your entire community.
Exactly right. And it's scalable. And again, I think all of us, efficiency is always the base, but actually what I think is more interesting is it's more effective. So what's more effective?
And they believe it.
Hearing from the salesperson about how great the product is, or hearing from another peer. I mean, that's the whole thing of MSP, like you're hearing from your peers about what works, not just technology, but in general, right? Comp plans.
Sure.
And that's like why, because you could hear from the vendor or your management, but it's just more compelling when you hear from somebody in your own shoes,
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why you guys have sought to facilitate this.
Correct.
With your guys' own community module as well, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because the way we got to that is pretty simple, which is our company is community first, like yours is, right? So we started a community called Pulse, and big conference, and in Europe, and there's an executive version, and there's all this stuff, local versions. And we figured out, holy cow, what people want is to meet other people like them. Everything else comes out of that, buying software, whatever. I want to meet people like them. I want to learn. We all know that. We are all in the same boat as CEOs, as founders, as sales leaders. We all have the same desire. So we started like, oh my God, we're a community first company. We didn't have the online technology. Then we're like, well, we should do an online community. And we found this company called Inside. So we bought it. And then literally 6 years later, after using it for 6 years and having a lot of success, we bought the company and we liked it so much we bought the company. And so that was the origin, was we were community first. We built an online community and we bought the company that built that technology.
And now you guys wrote a book, right?
And then we wrote a book. Exactly. So a little thing, for folks want to learn. I think community is so important. So we wrote a book, not about Gainsight, but community best practices, like both offline, online, advocates. And I think there's a lot of good, I'm super biased, but a lot of good information in there for this amazing MSP community. You're going to get a link in the chat. And if you fill out the forum, you'll get a free copy of the book. So a little gesture of appreciation for this community.
Yeah, I think that the important thing there is, I was talking with somebody earlier today about this, about like marketing channels and what have you, and like, you have to zig when other people are zagging.
Yeah.
And if it turns out that you have, like, look, if you have, strong product market fit and you have a core of early advocates, and usually that's kind of how things will start.
Yeah.
Is like you'll get these like early zealots, and it's very Jeffrey Moore kind of crossing the chasm.
Exactly.
Right. Not just from an organization standpoint, because like when Moore talks about crossing the chasm, he's largely talking about orgs.
Correct.
But also you have to think that like orgs are just like bundles of humans. And so what you want to do is it's kind of like the mixture of crossing the chasm plus like the challenger customer, because the challenger customer is all about like finding your fullback who's going to like be your lead blocker through the account to get the deal done. But then post deal, right, like you want to find that like lead blocker who then is going to run you through the rest of the industry as well, and like grab a hold of those, and you're going to find those super fans, even if it's 5, even if it's 15, and even if it's 50. And not only do you want to get them together so they can all like feed each other Kool-Aid, right, and be stoked upon the fact that like, oh, there's other people like me, I'm not just like this crazy person. And then of course like then that you onboard other people in that who then are like, oh, okay, cool, look at these people who are wildly successful. And I think that like, so if you can facilitate that can be very powerful. Now the important thing of course is that you do need to have super fans. So trying to do community if you don't have super fans, or if you don't have great product market fit or what have you, maybe stick with like the paid
Totally.
like the paid acquisition or what have you. But if you do have that asset and you do have super fans, then this is a great way of like getting force multiplication on that. And it's a fairly new craft, right? Does it live in marketing? Does it live in is it community? Like what?
Totally.
Like does it live in CS? Like or where is it? But the important thing is like you gotta do it. I think the last thing I wanted to kind of cover here is when for the year ahead, because here we are at the beginning of the year. Although I guess like we're a couple months in here, when folks are thinking about what it is that they're going to be focusing on this year, how should they be thinking about their like where success, right? I don't know if you guys are like working on a new phrase that's like more expansive from success, right? But like
every other meeting, yeah, we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, but magical words, right? But like, how should people be thinking about how they can use success to drive more revenue, whether it's retained revenue, right? It's obviously like, guess what? Revenue you don't lose, very useful, right? And net new within, right? Like expansions, like the pillars that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
What are things that people should be thinking about this year on like how they can use that as a source of leverage in growing their revenue?
Absolutely. I think the underlying premise is something you alluded to before, which is at Gainsight, we say our purpose statement is to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. So human first. And the idea is basically we have this sort of fictional notion of companies, but companies are humans, whether it's a human that's a job candidate or a human that's an alumni or company, human that's a prospect, human that's a customer. And so I think there's so much that we lose by thinking of them as companies. And I'm with you. Humans cross the chasm too, not just companies, right? Totally. And so especially in what happened is software was more top down. It was more like a company bought software. Now it's much more bottoms up in terms of adoption. So if you think about that premise as like underlying everything we could talk about. So let me some tactical examples. Well, one of the things to think about when you think about preserving revenue and driving price uplifts is what are the goals of the humans? And so there's one set of goals that's about like the leadership goals. Like, and what I always tell people there is figure out the goals of the company. Don't say, what are your goals? Say, when your CEO did your last all hands, what did she or he talk about as the goals of the company? Because then you get those true corporate goals. But then you got figure out the individual goals. So what are those individual goals? Hey, like, like, by the way, as a seller, what gives me a lot of joy is seeing my clients promoted. In fact, you know what? Like, a lot of my clients are now CCOs, right? You plant that. What's your career aspiration? You can't talk about this in a group meeting, but one-on-one. What's your career aspiration? What do you want to do next? What would it take? What are things you need to do? So that's building those goals in helps you defend price increases, churn, retention, right? And then you've got this expansion piece, which, as I mentioned, there's an entitlement aspect, which I think is a little bit harder to totally control, but there's an element of getting more deployment and usage. I think they're just an interesting tactic is what you said of kind of gamifying the adoption. And like you were talking about your power users and the sort of like, you got your promoters, mutual and detractors. And there, I think what's kind of cool as a tactic is you kind of survey those power users, and you can do it in app or whatever. And then you get those quotes. Forget about the number. The quote, hey, how does Gainsight help you every day? Okay, now you build a slide of those quotes and you're presenting to leadership or maybe a kickoff to the rest of your users and say, here's some great people, go talk to them, understand what they can learn, so you build that sort of tribe of advocates. So for driving entitlement growth, that's something. Now for driving cross-sell, okay, so this is about CSMs getting trained on what I'll call micro discovery. So it's not just, hey, do you have a community product? Okay, that's cool. A project. Something more interesting. Okay, tell me about the nature of how you guys sell new deals. How important is advocacy for those new deals? Tell me about, your support team. Are they trying to deflect more tickets? So you're asking these light discovery questions, not an hour discovery session. CSM can't do that. But can you give them the ammo to do like 5 minutes of discovery? So I'm on a one-on-one health check call with a customer. But I'm like, by the way, if you have a couple minutes, I just want to ask you like the broader sense of what's going on. If you find some of those, then you go create a lead for what we call CSQL for sales.
Yep, totally. And I think a really good thing that can happen there, like, customer success staff will do that out of the goodness of their heart, but repetition, and then moreover, just put a little spiff in front of that.
We do that. We do. Yeah, people are doing CSQL spiff as part of that. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Right? It could just be 100%. Like,
And by the way, last thing I'd just say on CS is CS has got to tie to sales. That's just the sales, not a 4-letter word, 5 letters, but it's also just like critical. And so we're seeing increasingly CSMs having more comp plan leverage. So CSM used to be like support, like 90-10, but then there's no incentive at that 10. People are going to 80-20. Some are going to 70-30, right? Not quite a full sales rep, but getting towards that very performance oriented plan.
Yeah, for sure. And I think at the end of the day, what we like, everyone just wants to win. And so the purpose of variable compensation plans is it does a couple things. One is it motivates incremental effort, right?
Yes.
So the joke that I always like to say is like, we all know that Nick is like a giant Taylor Swift fan, just like my wife and my 6-year-old. But so when you're watching the Eras Tour movie on Apple streaming or what have you. Obviously, which you've watched 3 times. You could just do it straight up, or you could be doing email while you're watching that.
Yeah.
Right. And like, and so like, just the incremental effort. And then the second thing too is focus, right? Focusing on the things that matter.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's the main one.
Where it's just like, and I think that this can sometimes be like AEs are like totally savage about this, where they're just like, cool, I'm gonna like pay attention to the ops that are biggest, furthest along, right, closest to the money, et cetera, and that can feel very I don't know, transactional or kind of like venal or whatever, but it's just essentially just like the cold economics of the market, just like focusing energy on places where like things are highest efficiency. And sometimes in success, it can kind of feel like, hey, my job is to get everybody to success. And it's like, yeah, but like, all my children, I love all my children equally, right? But like, the really, really large account the really, 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 really big one with like all the extra expansion upside, right? Like maybe we will have that one just like a little bit more, just a
I
little bit,
love it. And I,
right?
it's interesting. Maybe one of my final comments, a lot of people, the common expression, which I hate, is AEs are coin operated, because I think it's very pejorative. A lot of AEs I
Yeah,
know are like incredibly like strategic. They care about the customer, all that.
they're
And
focused.
the focus. And I love when people say, I want to make money. It's so great because it's so focused. And then like, if a CEO is complaining about AEs doing the wrong things, I'm like, your fault. You didn't
What are
design
you
the comp
comping
plan
them
the
for?
right way. You didn't design
Yeah.
the comp plan. So I actually am like, A's are not coin operated. Having incentive comp is awesome. Get it right. You'll have everyone there. And I get more of the company to be on incentive comp, So I don't like this whole A's are coin operated. I don't like that's a terrible way to think about things. So
We're just trying to we want like incremental effort to
yeah,
drive incremental reward, and we want when people focus and like when people focus calories into the right thing, we want them to get higher rewards for that as well. And when all that happens across a large bundle of humans, like 100 60 sellers and 120 AMs and CSMs, like magical things happen,
that's
right?
right. Exactly.
Um, Wonderful. Well, Nick, thank you very much for yet another example of a tour de force of post-sales revenue and post-sales success conversation. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Obviously, there's a bunch more sessions that we have at Modern Sales Pros Megasco. Super pumped to have everyone here today for those sessions. Nick, you have a great rest of your day. Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, Pete. Love it. And thanks for the audience as well. Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. See you guys.